I'm guessing. It's going to be 50 today, so. I will have to say I was enjoying that 70-degree weather. So. It's supposed to, yeah. It's supposed to be 70s again, and then snow again Wednesday, so, you know.
We got really lucky down south.
Yeah, I wish I was in the Dominator with Reed.
Yeah.
I was watching it. I watched it till about 1 in the morning as this live stream.
Quite a night.
All right, let's get to the right spot here. We are in the book of Judges, right? Judges. All right, so we are in chapter 1 of the book of Judges. We basically just got started. We didn't get too far in the beginning. I think we got down to verse 8. That's what I kind of was thinking. All right, so remember some of the things about chapter 1, and then also going to be some of chapter 2, is some of these things are just a rehash of what is found in the book of Joshua, some of these events. And so we're going to see that some current events for them, but also some things that happened during the time of Joshua being alive. And then, of course, as you get to chapter 2, there's a section about when Joshua died. So it's going back, and we started chapter 1 with after the deaths of Joshua. And so one thing to remember as we go through this book is that the Israelites, since they have left Egypt, has had Moses for a long period of time. Then they had Joshua, and they went from that to what? Judges. They really, and what was a judge? What do we talk about a judge was? Okay, a deliverer. I think the King James or the ASB used the word savior. And other versions use deliverer. And so the judge was not a leader. Well, they were a leader, but they were not like a king, right? Who was the king of Israel during this time of the book of Judges? God was. It wasn't until we get to the book of 1 Samuel that the people reject God as their king, and they want a king like everyone else. And so you can look at it as God being the king, and his military leader, his military commanders are the judges. Now, some of those judges were also other things, like prophetesses. We have Deborah. Then you have prophets, priests like Samuel, like Eli, and others. And so they weren't just military leaders, but we see them as also spiritual leaders of the kingdom too, or of their area. Remember, as we go through this, some of the judges overlap each other. We had that in our timeline on our introduction notes. Some of the judges served during the same time. And our map's going to change. But it's important to realize that, different areas. So sometimes you have your map from the introduction, but some of the judges were in different areas, and it was only for that area, it's a localized area. It wasn't a national. One of the few that we see as a national judge, I think, would be Samuel, because maybe even Eli also later on. All right, so we get into chapter 1, and we're looking at Judah. And so the first part of the chapter, Judah was chosen by God to go up first. Why is that significant?
Because of the line.
Yeah. Judah was going to be the tribe that Christ would come from, right? The kings would come from. And so it makes sense for then God to say Judah go up first and deliver the land into his hand. And so here God, as Judah goes up, Simeon goes with them, which is important because we see Simeon has a part of Judah. And as we get later on in history, this tribe of Simeon really disappears, and it becomes Judah. And just kind of like the Levites. When you look at the two different tribes that really didn't have a land that they kept for a long time, the Simeon and then the Levites. The Levites had cities instead of an area like that. And so Judah was to go up first, and that got us down to verse 8. And so they went and captured the king, Adonai-Bezek, and they cut off his thumbs and his toes, which was a reference to the fact that he would not be able to flee. It would humble him. And so then verse 8. Did we read? Let's read verse 8 through 15. Somebody want to read that?
Now the children of Judah fought against Jerusalem and took it. They struck it with the edge of the sword and set the city on fire. And afterward the children of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites, who dwelt in the mountains in the south and in the lowland. Then Judah went against the Canaanites who dwelt in Hebron. Now the name of Hebron was formerly Kirjath, that one. And they killed Shishai and Ammon and Tamai. From there they went against the inhabitants of Debir. The name of Debir was formerly that word. Then Caleb said, whoever attacks Kirjath Sepher and takes it to him, I will give my daughter Ashal as wife. And Othniel, the son of Kezaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it. So he gave him his daughter Ashal as wife. Now it happened when she came to him that she urged him to ask her father for a field. And she dismounted from her donkey, and Caleb said to her, what do you wish? So she said to him, give me a blessing, since you have given me land in the south. Give me also springs of water. And Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs.
All right, so the children of Judah, they go against Jerusalem. Now, it's important to realize this was not called Jerusalem at this time. This city would be occupied by the Jebusites, and this city was called Salem, and then it was called Jebus, and then when David captured it, he made it Jerusalem. And so you got to remember the writer, he's writing during the time of the kings, as we talked about, possibly if it was Samuel writing. He's writing during the first early 8 stages of the king, David and Saul. And the cities and things are different names by then. And sometimes he indicates that. But Jerusalem here was captured. Now, we talked about this in the introduction. Was this captured before? Somebody read Joshua 15, verse 63. Okay, so there we see that when they first conquered the land, they didn't drive the Jebusites out. Jerusalem was not captured. Now here it's stated that Jerusalem is captured, but then later on, when we get to the time of David, the Jebusites still lived in Jerusalem. And we talked about that in the introduction, how David went in and captured. Well, he sent one of his men in to capture Jerusalem. And so this city must have been captured and then recaptured again, back and forth by the people. Remember, they didn't drive them all out, right? And so if they didn't drive them all out, what's going to happen? It's going to be conflict. They're going to fight. They're going to continue to conquer back areas and things like that. And so I think that's what we see here. And so it states that they captured Jerusalem, which would have been Salem or Jebus at this time. But it doesn't stay in their occupation very long. And so verse 9, it says, and afterward the children of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites, who dwelt in the mountains in the south and in the lowland. And so the area of Judah was divided into 3 areas. You can't really tell on here, but the area that's around Jerusalem is very mountainous. And this area over here is very fertile. And so the area close to the sea would have been more fertile. This area is then mountainous. There's a lot of altitude difference between the Dead Sea and Jerusalem, a lot. And then, of course, the wilderness area down here. And so it was divided here talks about into the mountainous areas around Jerusalem, the south, which would be the desert areas or wilderness areas toward Egypt, and then the lowlands, the fertile area between the mountains and the coast. And so they went and captured this area and taken in their possession. And so then verse 10, it says, then Judah went against the Canaanites who dwelt in Hebron. Now the name of Hebron was formerly Kirjath Arba. And they killed Shishai, Ammoni, and Talmai. And so these are the three sons of the king of Kirjath Arba. The name Arba of the Anakims was what the Jews called it, or the city of four. That was Hebron. What was significant about Hebron? Do you guys remember? Abraham, right? So I'm going to read Genesis 23 and verse 2. So as we're going through this, these areas are getting captured and renamed. So Kirjath Arba then becomes Hebron, and so they're just changing the names as they go along. But it's Genesis 23 verse 2.
And Sarah died in Kirjath Arba, the same as Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her.
Okay, so she died there. 25 and verse 9. Genesis 25:9.
And his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephraim, the son of Zohar, the Hittite, which is before Mamre.
Okay, so he was also buried in this area of Hebron. It's where Sarah died. He bought that field, and it's where they were buried. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were buried here. Now the Jews, it's interesting if you look at history, the Jews believe that Adam was also buried there. Now, how would they know that? When did Adam live? Long before that, but what happened between the time of Adam, the flood? So how would they know that? I don't know. But they believe that Adam was also buried there. And so just kind of crazy. But something else significant about Hebron, so I'm going to read 2 Samuel 2 and verse 1.
And it came to pass after this that David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said unto him, go up. And David said, whither shall I go up? And he said, unto Hebron.
Okay, and then chapter 5, verse 1 through 5.
Then came all the tribes of Israel to David unto Hebron, and spake, saying, behold, we are thy bone and thy flesh. Also in time past, when Saul was king over us, thou wast he that led us out and brought us in Israel. And the Lord said to thee, thou shalt feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be the captain over Israel. So all the elders of Israel came to the king to Hebron, and King David made a league with them in Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem he reigned 30 and 3 years over all Israel and Judah.
Okay, so, and you look at David. David went up to Hebron in chapter 2, verse 1. He started to reign as king, but he was only king of what area? Judah. Because Israel, which is going to be later known as Israel, everything really from Benjamin and Dan and up, they wanted to still have Saul's lineage be king, but Judah followed after David. So David reigned 7 years. Was it 7 years, 6 months? Where are we at my notes? Yeah, 7 years and 6 months in Judah before he became king over all of Israel and later reigned for that total period of time. And so Hebron is an important area. and it had been taken. If you go back to Joshua chapter 10, it had been taken. So this is kind of a reference to looking back into Joshua and some of the conquests there, as we stated before. And so then look at verse 10. It says, and Judah went up against the Canaanites who dwelt at Hebron, or verse 11. From there they went against the inhabitants of Debir. The name of Debir was formerly Kirjath-Spher. And then so verse 12, then Caleb said, whoever attacks Kirjath-Spher and takes it, to him I will give my daughter Akash as wife. So Caleb sends Caleb at this time, is he getting older? Yeah. He's still very strong, and he still does a lot of conquesting in that time. And because God was really with him because of what he did. And he captured a lot. But here he gives a request to the people. He says, if somebody goes up and captures this city, then I will give them my daughter. These events are very similar to Joshua 15, verse 14 through 19. So again, we're getting a review of the book of Joshua here. And so the one that did go up is Othniel. Verse 13 says, and Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. So that's interesting, is his younger brother is what's stated there. Now, is it really his younger brother? That word brother is used in different ways. It is used as in brother, physical brother. It's also used in reference to brethren, context of brethren. Paul uses it, my brethren, in reference to the Jews, blood Jews that he is, his brethren in the New Testament. But notice Caleb's father was different than Othniel. So let me read Numbers 13 and verse 6. Yeah, so Caleb's father was different than the father of Othniel, because verse 13 says Othniel, the son of Kenaz.
Maybe I'm reading this differently than you, but to me this reads that Othniel is the son of Kenaz, who is Caleb's brother, so Kenaz is Caleb's brother. So this would be his nephew.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Okay.
It's his nephew. No, they are nephews. And so that's what I mean, that a reference to brother there can mean brethren, things like that. It has to have been reference to him being his nephew. And so it makes it a little bit better because it's not his brother marrying his sister, but it was his nephew. And so Othniel then does capture this city for Caleb. He is given Caleb gives his daughter, Akash, to him as wife. But what else do we know about Othniel? Somebody read Judges 3 and verse 9.
When the children of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer for the children of Israel, who delivered them. Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother.
Okay, so our first judge that we're going to find is going to be Othniel. And that's this man. And so he's going to be our first judge that we'll see later. So then verse 14, it says, now it happened when she came to him, this is the daughter here, Akash, she urged him to ask her father for a field, and she dismounted from her donkey, and Caleb said to her, what do you wish? She said to him, give me a blessing, since you have given me land in the south. Give me also springs of water. Now remember, we divided this land up, the south. The south is a wilderness area. So there's not as much, when you think about the south, the children of Israel, they wandered down in the south, which is down in here. Of course, they had times they didn't have water, right? God had to provide them water. And so she's looking towards the future. She's requesting that Othniel says something to Caleb and asks for some land. But it's funny because she just ended up doing it herself. She gets down from her donkey, goes up to her father and says, please give me some land, areas with springs of water. She's looking to the future and knowing that they're gonna need that. And so he ends up giving them that request. And so the end of verse 15, it says, and Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. So then verse 16, it says, now the children of Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up from the city of palms. What is the city of palms? Jericho. But
Well, I was gonna go back to that last part. She knew they were gonna need it. The clans had divided up the property at that point, had they?
I don't think so, no.
So she couldn't request that part for theirs
Yep.
of that.
Yeah, I think you're right, for sure. They hadn't divided it up yet, and so now they are. She's getting ahead of the game. She's like, I want to make sure we get something here.
I want dibs on this.
Yeah. And Caleb pretty much got whatever he wanted because of who he was and what he did.
So I'm curious here, there in Judges 1:14, where it said, one day Asuka came to Othniel and urged him to ask her father for a field. The notes that I've got in the BSB is LXX and Vulgate say, and he urged her.
And he urged her. Yes, I did notice that in my notes.
And that's, just, you listening to you and looking at this, it's like, well, that would make more sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would. I forgot about that. I was looking at the LXX, which is the Septuagint, stated that it changes that wording to where he's saying, you please ask your father for this. Yeah. And that would make more sense with what we see here. So I don't know why none of the other translations translate it that way, but it's translated the way we have it here. But yeah, it's interesting. That would make more sense for sure. All right, thanks for bringing that up. I forgot about that. Look at now let's get down to verse 16. It says, now the children of Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up from the city of palms with the children of Judah into the wilderness of Judah, which lies in the south near Arad, and they went and dwelt among the people. So the Kenites. Now it says here, the Kenites, Moses' father-in-law. So what's significant about Moses' father-in-law? Jethro, right? Where do we learn about him? Back in, as they left Egypt, right? In Exodus chapter 18, Jethro had a really significant part in helping Moses, right? Because Moses was beat, exhausted with dealing with every problem the people had, millions of people that went out of Egypt. And Jethro is looking at this and he gives them wisdom. Now, Jethro was also a prophet of God, it tells us. And so he tells him that, you need to divide this up in leadership and have a hierarchy, and you be the one that deals with the worst issues that cannot be dealt with. And so Jethro, we learn now, here is the Kenites. They become his descendants. Jethro's descendants become the Kenites.
Didn't he have a different name? Did Jethro have a different name?
I don't remember. You have to look. I thought it was just Jethro. He was the priest of... She'll let me know.
I have to know now. I'm pretty sure when Moses flees to Midian and meets Jethro and the family, he's got a different name. Yes.
Reuel.
Just because I found it in my concordance.
You're fine.
Numbers 10:29.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I was trying to figure out how we got to the Kenites because that was never one of these.
No, that doesn't work with his name. So the Kenites were descendants of Jethro, the priest of Midian, and that was the father of Zipporah, which was Moses' father-in-law. And they dwelt in Judah. And so the city of palms would be Jericho. So that's Deuteronomy. If you go back to Deuteronomy 34:3, it talks about how that is the city of palms. And so this must have been the area where the Amalekites dwelt. And Saul told them to leave from the land. So let me read 1 Samuel 15 and verse 6.
Go, depart, get you down from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with them. For ye showed kindness to all the children of Israel when they came up out of Egypt. So the Canaanites departed from among the Amalekites.
Yep. So the area of Jericho would have been the area where the Amalekites lived, and they were not, of course, completely destroyed. And so when Saul was told to go kill the Amalekites, which we know 1 Samuel 15, he didn't do exactly what God said, right? So he is doing something very good in the beginning by telling the Kenites, which is Jethro's descendants, hey, you did a great thing for Israel when we came out of Egypt. Please leave this area so that you don't get wiped out with the rest of them. And they do. And so they must have dwelt among the land of the Amalekites, which would have been this area. So of course, Jericho is down here. So it would have been in this area that the Amalekites lived. But the Kenites became another name. So I'm going to read 1 Chronicles 2 and verse 55.
And the families of the scribes who dwelt in Jabez were the Tirathites, the Shimeathites, and the Sukathites. These were the Kenites who came from Hamath, the father of the house of Rechab.
Okay, so the Rechabites are the same, the other names that were used there, is another name. So why their names keep changing, I don't know. But it keeps going back to the Kenites, or the descendants of Jethro, who dwelt in this area. They end up becoming a part of Judah. And they were very honored by God. God continued to bless them, and because of what Jethro did. Somebody read Jeremiah 35 in verse 18 and 19.
Jeremiah said to the house of the Rechabites, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, because ye have obeyed the commandment of Jonah your father, and kept all his precepts, and done according unto all that he hath commanded you. Therefore thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, Jonadab, the son of Rechab, shall not want a man to stand before me forever.
Okay, so we're not going to read the whole context, but in Jeremiah 35, they were told to do something, but they didn't because Jechobab told them not to, and they wanted to honor him. And so God honors the people. And, Jeremiah 35, that is during the time of the Babylonian captivity, where Nebuchadnezzar came in and captured all the people. And so God, even in that far down the line, is still blessing these people because of what they did. And I think it's just important to see from the moment that Jethro helped Moses until all the way even through Jeremiah, God is still blessing them because of the actions of Jethro. And isn't that interesting? Because of his dedication to God and his kindness, it affected generation after generation. And God continued to protect them and to bless them.
Did he promise Jethro that, or is it just something that he did? I don't know.
No, it was just something that Jethro
Like
did.
David, he made a promise, a covenant with him.
Mm-hmm.
But,
I don't remember any covenant with God that Jethro had made. But just see that he was an honorable person and his descendants were blessed because of that. So it's interesting what you see, the actions, the kindness that we show people can affect many, many following. So, all right, so then we continue in verse 17. Let's see, verse 17, it says, And Judah went with his brother Simeon, and they attacked the Canaanites who inhabited Zephath and utterly destroyed it. So the name of the city was called Hormah. Also, Judah took Gaza with its territory, Ashkelon with its territory, and Ekron with its territory. Now, Gaza, Ashkelon, Ekron, these are the principal cities of the Canaanites. We're going to see them continue later down the road, but there's two more. There's 5 principal cities of Canaan. Ashdod, I'm not going to be able to quote them all now. Ashdod, Ekron, Gaza, then you have, I think, is it Gath? Ashdod, and Gath. Ashdod and Gath, yep. So they're all the 5 principal cities. That's going to play a part later because, well, as we've been reading through 1 Samuel, when they capture the Ark of the Covenant of God, they take it to each one of those principal cities, and God just completely causes all kinds of havoc on them and their gods. Because each one of those is a reference to a god that they worshipped, and God destroyed those gods as he went through them, those small g gods.
Yeah, that's the land of the Philistines.
Yep, the land of the Philistines. And the Philistines are going to be a problem for Israel for a long time. Only during the time of really Solomon and David did we see them be captured and actually dwell in that land like God intended. All right, so, yeah.
Kind of a modern side note, look at the problems that are going on in the Gaza Strip.
I know.
Throughout the city of Gaza. And
It's still going on today. Yes. And I think the unrest there is just because of the fact that, you don't say the land is cursed, but that's what God intended with the way they acted and the things that's going on. I think there's always going to be unrest in that area. That's never going to change. All right, so continuing on, we see these principal cities, that's Ashdod here, all the way to, where did we get to? Verse 19. So the Lord was with Judah, and they drove out the mountaineers, but they could not drive out the inhabitants of the lowland because they had chariots of iron. Now, were they not strong enough to drive them out? Or was it because they had fear? Because what did God do for them everywhere they went? He fought for them. We find that in verse 1 and 2. And here it says God was with them. So could they have captured the lowland with their chariots? Yes. Now, this is during the time of the general use of iron is starting to finally be used. So we call it the Iron Age, I guess you could say. And we don't see the children of Israel really use iron until the time of Saul and David. There's some verses there, we're not going to read that, but 2 Samuel 12:31, 1 Chronicles 22:3 and 29:7 talks about their use of iron. But they could have drove them out, but they didn't because of fear. And so I think that's important to notice there. It's not stated, but we know God was with them for every other conquest. They could have captured them for sure.
Whenever they say fear, you reference fear, is it fear or a combination of not trusting God?
I think it's a combination of not trusting God.
Oftentimes we talk about fear, and I think it's kind of not trusting in God, which we all deal with.
Yep, that's right.
they did the same thing when it came to entering the promised land the first time.
They saw the giants and were scared, had fear, and yet God was going to wipe them out. So, I mean, if you go through the book of Joshua, how many battles, they fought several battles, but how many battles were fought before they even got there?
How many miracles had he done in bringing them out of Egypt?
Yeah.
Couldn't wrap their heads around that he could defeat an army.
Yep. Well, there's several times that they would go up to battle against an army that was 3 times their size, and they'd get there and they're all gone or all dead because God caused confusion and they started killing each other. And so they should have learned. But, are we any different? No, we're not any different. We forget what God does for us. We forget his blessings. We forget. And sometimes we need reminded. And so they need reminded too. And as we said, that God leaves them there to test them. Do what?
Comfortable.
Yeah, we get too comfortable. Yeah. And
See what's been done for us.
I think that's one of the big things as we get into chapter 2 and 3, really chapter 3. They got comfortable, got easy, and they forgot about God, for sure. All right, so continuing on, verse 20, and they gave Hebron to Caleb, as Moses had said, so that was promised to Caleb. Then he expelled from there the 3 sons of Anak. And the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who inhabited Jerusalem. So the Jebusites dwell with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. So that's another point. Remember we talked about who wrote this book. Samuel if it was Samuel, which I believe it was, he would have wrote during the time of Saul. Just Jerusalem, the Jebusites were not driven out until the time of David. So it gives us a period of time where we know the writer was writing this book. And so it really fits with Samuel because it says to this day. Now remember, when it says to this day, does it mean today? No. It means in the day that that person was writing. So it shows us that, again, Jerusalem is not captured. It's still inhabited. And Benjamin, which is interesting, Benjamin dwelled in this area of Jerusalem. Now, Benjamin takes over Jerusalem a little bit, but it's believed that the boundary line between Judah and Benjamin was right through Jerusalem. But it says the Benjamites dwelled in the same area. Well, how did that happen? Well, it could have been some lived on one side of the city and some lived on the other side of the city. We're not told, but we are told that they dwelled together in that area. And so, let me catch up on my notes here. One thing to notice before we move on, the sons of Anak were giants. Okay, the sons of Anak were giants. There was a lot of giants in the Philistines area, of course. That's where Goliath comes from. And so, then, we're out of time. They're pushing us. Verse 22, we'll pick up here next week and finish out the chapter. I thought we'd get through the chapter today. But we'll pick up here. Huh? Getting in, looking at the giants now.
I expect your A game next week.
Justin's interested in the giants.